We made it! Today's video is the last one covering The Geek Way by Andrew McAfee. If this is your first time seeing a Busy Book Club video, welcome. My name is Mike, and on this channel we read new and interesting books so we can have new and interesting ideas. Today's video is in two parts. First, we're going to be talking about the final chapter of The Geek Way, which is all about openness. Then we're going to wrap up The Geek Way by revisiting the questions we asked in the very first video. So let's get started. The subtitle of Chapter 7 about openness is A Better Business Model. To understand what that means, we have to look at the last business model. It's called Model 1, and it defines a set of norms that were first described by Chris Argyris. It's the model that most companies use, or at least used to use, and it has three main characteristics. First is unilateral control. This is where leaders are in control and they make all the decisions. They don't have to consult anybody. They're in charge. Whatever they say goes. The second norm in Model 1 is you have to win at all costs. There's no room for failure. If you do fail, you have to avoid admitting fault or any kind of weakness. You must be a winner. And then finally, the third norm as a part of Model 1 is that you need to suppress negative feelings. We don't talk about doubt, fear, or frustration here. Communication and constructive criticism are discouraged. You stay in your lane, and any bad feelings come up, you just stay positive, chin up, face forward, and keep going. A lot of companies use this Model 1 thinking, even today, and it can lead to defensiveness as people try to protect their reputation. Certain topics become off limits because no one talks about failure, so learning is much slower, and as people try to make themselves seem more important to gain more control, bureaucracy naturally emerges. That additional bureaucracy means everything is monitored much more closely, leading to a lack of trust in the organization, because everyone's trying to protect their reputation and who they are, and no one's trusting them to do anything. There's a feeling that there's absolutely no trust in a company that uses Model 1. The openness norm that Andrew McAfee talks about is different. First, you want to increase common knowledge. And common knowledge is information that everyone knows. It's important information like financials and key metrics. Those should be public to everyone in the company. Strategy documents for all parts of the organization, they should also be common to everyone. You're not just making this data available so that everyone knows the information. You also want to make sure that everyone else knows that everyone else knows. And why that's important is it reduces information asymmetry so that everyone in the organization is operating on the same set of assumptions and facts. And a follow-on to that is it increases observability and reduces plausible deniability. The second part of the openness norm is that leaders need to be able to model vulnerability and welcome challenges to their thinking. They should be actively seeking dissent and trying to find other ways of thinking. That way, when their thinking is off, it provides some mechanism of course correction. If someone else sees something that they should adjust, the leader can get that feedback. As part of this vulnerability, leaders should also acknowledge failures and celebrate learning. Not everything we do works out 100% of the time. So this openness norm acknowledges that and focuses on the learning from the failure rather than denying that the failure ever happened. And that's the openness norm in a nutshell. I think the openness norm is incredibly important, and I think it kind of acts as the glue for the other three. A sort of way of thinking that has to be ubiquitous among everyone in the organization to encourage that continuous feedback loop. I think without the openness part of it, the other three norms don't necessarily work. At least not the way Andrew McAfee describes them. Okay, so now that we've covered the openness norm, let's answer the three questions that we talked about in the introduction to the Geek Way. The first question was, what defines the Geek Way? And as we know now, the Geek Way is defined by four norms: science, ownership, speed, and openness. Science is a commitment to using evidence over intuition or hierarchy. You're not relying on the opinion of the highest paid person in the room. It's the idea of using experiments to test hypotheses and openly debating them by all the employees involved. Ownership is about empowering individuals and teams with autonomy, responsibility, and accountability as a means to cut down bureaucracy. Speed is rapid iteration with the necessary feedback loops to keep improving the product. And then finally, openness, which we just discussed, is all about candid communication and a willingness to challenge the assumption of senior leaders, and senior leaders being willing to accept those challenges. In order for this to work, a failure must be accepted as a necessary part of innovation, and that promotes psychological safety. The second question is, why does it work? I think McAfee set this up really well in Chapter 3, where he talks about how humans are ultra-social. For example, humans are naturally biased to present their best selves to their coworkers and the people around them, and so they might not always tell the truth about a failure. But that science norm, as an example, encourages people to show that they're testing ideas rather than trying to prove that their ideas are best. So it leverages the ultra-social behavior of humans rather than being thwarted by it. The ownership norm takes away opportunities for status seeking because people are always trying to increase their status in a hierarchical organization. The ownership norm takes that opportunity away, and it motivates people to contribute in a very direct way. I think McAfee did a really good job of motivating the 4 norms through Chapter 3, where he talks about how humans are so ultra-social and how many of the bad behaviors we see from Model 1 actually stem from humans being ultra-social. And the 4 norms of the Geek way actually leverage those ultra-social aspects of humans to make organizations better. The final question we asked is, what are the pitfalls? And I think there are a couple. Overall, I think the Geek way makes a lot of sense, but we should acknowledge the things that don't necessarily work. For example, in the chapter on science, McAfee talks about how debate should be encouraged. He does spend some time talking about psychological safety, but I don't think he spends enough time talking about how to keep healthy debate from turning ugly. It seems like someone could say they're arguing in good faith, but really they are just trying to assert some dominance over a junior member of the team, for example. The second thing that we need to acknowledge with the Geek way is that it's probably not suitable for all industries. There are industries where there's stiff regulation or where safety is super important. For example, you probably don't want someone at the nearest nuclear power plant trying a new idea and just seeing if it works. That doesn't seem like a good idea. And then finally, I think McAfee does acknowledge this to a certain extent, but maybe doesn't go into it at a deep level, is that the high level of autonomy and trust afforded to individuals in geek companies can be abused. If you don't put the proper checks and balances in place, individuals might engage in behavior that is unethical, or they could prioritize their personal gain over the company's goals. And while the Geek way uses observability and common knowledge to kind of suppress this risk, could still happen, and it's not something you could ever catch up front. It's something you would end up discovering in the end. So it's a risk that you can't discover until later. But overall, I do think the Geek way is a really interesting way of looking at how companies, especially in the tech sector, are changing how their culture evolves and how it's making their organizations more effective. And I think everyone can learn something from reading this book or from watching these busy book club videos. Now, to wrap up, I do have a bit of an announcement. From here on out, I'm going to be switching to full book reviews rather than doing chapter by chapter. I just think it works better for a weekly cadence, and doing chapter by chapter, I kind of get stuck in the details, and it takes a long time to get through a book. And when we started this book 2 months ago, it's kind of painful how slow it goes. So I'm going to try switching to reading full books every week. The next book will be Superagency by Reid Hoffman and Greg Beato. It comes out on Tuesday the 28th. Now, Reid Hoffman has written 5 other books prior to this one. I have a Substack publication where I've been generating AI book summaries. So if you're interested in learning about those 5 other books, you can check out the links in the description. Reading the Geek Way has been absolutely fantastic. I'll put together a playlist. Thank you so much for watching this video. and all the past videos about the Geek Way. I will see you next time for Superagency by Reid Hoffman and Greg Beato.